Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, where we take up important articles of the day from the newspaper and discuss them in detail as per the demands of Civil Services exam. Articles covered today are displayed on your screen and their notes in PDF and Word format are provided in the description box down below. Without further ado, let us begin. Now let us start with the first article of the day, which appeared in page 1 of today's Hindu newspaper. This article highlights that the retail inflation in the country is at a 3-month high, which is 4.8%, and this is primarily due to rise in food prices. Items of daily consumption such as cereals, pulses, milk and tomatoes have seen record inflation. And as a result, inflation in the country has increased. Now, inflation in food products is important from GS Paper 3 point of view. And this inflation is primarily related to issues with transport and marketing of agriculture produce. Further, in the mains of the year 2020, a question appeared on main constraints in transport and marketing. Also, in the prelims of the year 2017, a question appeared on National Agriculture Market Scheme. Hence, this topic is important from both mains and prelims point of view. Now let us start our today's discussion first by discussing the factors that are affecting the food prices. The first factor that affects the food prices is a cobweb phenomena. This phenomena happens when production of a commodity responds to a prices with a certain lag. Let us understand this phenomena with the help of an example. Suppose currently the prices of tomatoes are very high, and hence this will prompt the producers of tomatoes to increase their output in the following cropping season, as tomatoes are commanding a very high prices currently. However, when the crops will eventually grow, this will lead to oversupply of tomatoes in the market, and this supply will far exceed the demand of tomatoes in the market. Thus, will lead to heavy losses to the farmers. And hence, the prices of tomatoes have responded to the demand with a certain lag, and this is called a cobweb phenomena. The second factor which is affecting the food prices is called cascading effect. As between the producers and the final consumers, there are multiple intermediaries in the market, which includes APMC mandis and transporters, etc. And they levy various charges in return of their services. And this charges further adds to the final charges which is paid by the consumer and hence leading to inflated food prices. The third factor is absence of adequate infrastructure, which leads to high transportation cost, lack of cold storage facility and lack of food processing facilities. Further, there has been demand and supply gaps in the country. For example, tomatoes are produced primarily in the southern states of India, whereas at this time the demand of tomatoes are high in the northern states, and hence there exists a supply gap in the northern state which leads to increase in prices of tomatoes. Further, the prices have increased due to weather disturbances. High temperatures, which was in summer this year, and coupled with unusually sharper rains currently, have led to increase in prices of food products. Further, commodities like onions and potatoes are perishable in nature, and non-availability of cold chain infrastructure further adds to the challenges of storing such perishable products. And as a result, the perishable food products get damaged due to fluctuating weather. Also, there are logistical challenges associated. When it rains, transportation becomes a big issue and it leads to high transportation charges. And this further adds to the prices of food products. Also, there has been uncertainty with respect to monsoon rainfall. Despite adequate rainfall currently, there have been 13% deficit in overall rainfall in the country, and which is further coupled by uncertainty which is associated by impending El Nino phenomena. And this has created a speculation in the market which has further aggravated the food prices. Now, after we have dealt with factors that are affecting food prices, let us take a look at the government interventions that have been taken previously and also can be taken currently. Now, government intervenes when there has been a price increase in the market, and this intervention is done in order to protect the interest of consumers in the country. The first intervention is that the government imposes export restrictions. For example, when the prices of wheat increased as a result of Russia-Ukraine war, the government has restricted the export of wheat and sugar, and this has led to increase in supply of wheat and sugar in the domestic market, and which calms down the increasing food inflation. The second measure is that it imposes stock limits on the traders, which the government can do under the Essential Commodities Act of the year 1955 and Prevention of Black Marketing and Maintenance of Supplies of Essential Commodities Act of the year 1980. Also, the government undertakes distribution of commodities such as tomatoes and onions through organized channels such as Mother Dairy and Safal, etc. And these organized outlets they provide commodities such as onions at a fixed price. Also, to control the hoarding of food products, the government conducts tax raids on traders, and this has resulted into supply of hoarded material into the market, which eventually leads to lower food prices. Also, the government undertakes imports from international markets. For example, last year, when the prices of onions in the domestic market were high, India undertook imports from countries such as Turkey to increase the supply of onions in the domestic market. Also, the government has established the Price Stabilization Fund, which is there to regulate the price volatility of horticultural commodities. Further, the government introduced Operation Green Scheme, which aims to enhance the production of horticultural commodities and reduce their volatility prices. It also aims to promote the farmer producer organizations, agri logistics, and processing facilities. The scope of this scheme was first limited to tomatoes, onions, and potatoes. However, recently it was increased to all, that is total. Further, the government undertakes price monitoring of essential commodities such as onion, tomatoes, and 20 other commodities. And this price monitoring is done by Consumer Affairs Department in order to make effective intervention when the prices of such products increase. Now, after we have taken the look at government interventions, let us take a look at the way forward which can be done in order to further increase the supply of food products, thereby reducing their prices eventually. The first way forward is to rationalize the price stabilization system. By doing so, NAFED, which is a National Procurement Agency of Food Products, can procure at least 2 to 3 tons of essential commodities such as onions at a rich harvest time and then supply these onions in the market when there is a supply deficit. Further, the price deficiency payment system of the government needs to be implemented on a pan-India basis. Private procurers can be encouraged to procure the food grains and food products at MSPs, and the difference of their prices can be supplied to by government as a form of subsidy. Also, there is a need for a technology driven price forecasting system, which should undertake the prices of commodities at various markets in the country and aim to disseminate these prices to farmers. This will help reduce the cobweb phenomena which we have discussed earlier. Further, there is a need to promote processed foods, such as promoting the use of dehydrated onions and tomato purees, which will help reduce the demand of such commodities when the prices of such commodities are high. Also, there is an impending need to invest in storage infrastructure and agri-logistics. And this, according to the Shanta Kumar Committee, will have a multiplier effect on the agriculture economy in the country. Further, there is a need to develop a cluster based approach in agro processing, and this approach will help stabilize the demand supply equation in a country which is currently tilted in a favor of one area. Hence, by rationalizing the price stabilization system, expanding the scope of price deficiency payment system, encouraging technology driven price forecasting, promoting processed foods, developing infrastructure, and undertaking a cluster approach will help stabilize the prices of commodities in India, and this will eventually reduce the food inflation in the country. This was all for today's discussion on food inflation. Now, moving on to the second article of the day, which appeared on page 8 of today's Hindu newspaper. Last week, TRAI, that is Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, it sought inputs on whether there is a possibility of selectively banning an app instead of completely shutting down the internet. As both shutting down the internet and selectively banning an app has an implication on fundamental rights of citizen, hence this topic is important from GS paper 2 point of view, which deals with Indian constitution and its features. Further, in the year of 2017, a question appeared on mains, which was on fundamental rights with respect to Supreme Court's judgment on right to privacy. Further, in the year of 2015, question appeared on sovereignty, unity and integrity of India in the prelims. Hence, this topic is important from both prelims and mains point of view. Let us start off our today's discussion with first dealing with internet shutdown. Then we will proceed with the TRAI's idea to selectively ban an app. Now, internet shutdown are imposed in states and districts across the India from time to time, which is done in order to prevent the rapid spread of provocative content during a communally charged period. The Indian government, it considers the internet shutdown as a legitimate tool in order to maintain law and order. Now, in terms of internet shutdown, India tops the list globally. Also, there are legislative provisions which facilitates suspension of internet. These are Information Technology Act of the year 2000, Section 144 of the CRPC Act of 1973, as well as temporary suspension of telecom services rules, which was framed under the Telegraph Act of 1885. Now, there are many arguments, both which favor internet shutdown and those which are against internet shutdown. First, let us consider why is there a need for an internet shutdown. Internet shutdown, it helps prevent spread of fake news and hate speeches, which is critical in a diverse country like India, as such a spread of fake news can spread misinformation and hence disturb the communal harmony in the country. Further, internet shutdowns are also critical in ensuring peace and stability in the country, as mobs who conduct violence as they use internet to spread misinformation. Also, it helps avoid disruption in the public sphere. However, there are many arguments who do not support internet shutdown. The first argument, it holds that internet shutdown violates human rights, as it is a tool to curb dissent, which gives government an excessive control over the dissemination of information, helps government dominate the narrative. Further, there are economic costs of internet shutdowns. As per a report, India lost over $1.3 billion annually due to these internet shutdowns. Further, it has also been argued that such internet shutdowns fails to achieve desired objectives, as there is no conclusive evidence which shows that the internet shutdown can lead to maintenance or restoration of law and order. Further, there are social costs of internet shutdowns as well, which include fundamental services such as education, healthcare, and other public services which are held back in case the internet shuts down. Also, internet banking stops working, and agricultural extension services and emergency services are unable to function without a proper internet connection. As a result, the Supreme Court has given few observations in this regard, which was done primarily due to restrictions of internet services in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. What are these directions? Let us take a look in the next slide. Now the Supreme Court, it held that freedom of speech and expression through internet is covered under the provision of fundamental rights under the Article 19 1A. The Supreme Court also held that restrictions on the internet must follow the principles of proportionality, which is under the Article 19 subsection 2. It also held that there is a freedom of trade and commerce which can be exercised through the use of internet, and it is also covered under the Article 19(1) of subsection G of fundamental rights. Further, the suspension of internet for an indefinite period is not permissible, and hence there is a need to have a definite suspension followed by a government order. The Supreme Court also held that the Section 144 of the CRPC Act does not give the right to the government to suppress a legitimate speech and expression or exercise of democratic rights. Hence, the Supreme Court held that there is a need to strike a balance between the rights of an individual and concerns of a state before imposition of Section 144. Hence, shutdowns which are prolonged, they affect access to education, work, banking and information technology. As a result, these shutdowns have a severe implication on normal day-to-day life. In this regard, the government has sought to loosen these restrictions gradually, and therefore today's news article is important in this regard. Now the approach which TRAI has suggested, it requires a telecom operator and messaging firms like WhatsApp to cooperate with each other and stop access to services during an internet shutdown. The telecom regulator has also sought input on licensing messaging apps which may require these firms to be subjected to enhanced surveillance and blocking requirements. However, these bring certain challenges as well. What are these challenges? Let us consider in the next slide. The first challenge pertains to the need for differential regulations. In 2015 and 18, TRAI, it held consultations on regulating messaging apps, and these processes led to wide-ranging protections for net neutrality. Net neutrality is a concept that all internet traffic should be treated equally. However, in case TRAI sorts a partial app ban, this will violate the principle of net neutrality. However, since 2016, TRAI has moved on from the idea of net neutrality, and it held that regulating messaging apps has become more of a matter of national security and policing. However, if TRAI sorts to achieve a partial ban on an app, it can be bypassed using a virtual private network. A VPN, it is a tunnel to users' internet traffic through another server. VPN, they usually route their data through servers which are located outside any country, and hence these servers are not subjected to local laws. Further, some VPNs also promise that they do not maintain any logs of their customers' usage, and hence these servers are used by many, including privacy-conscious users, cyber criminals, and terrorists. And as a result, certain published directions which required VPN firms to retain record of users from India and have their servers physically located in India. However, these firms continued to offer their services using servers which were located abroad. And as a result, this makes it challenging for TRAI to partially ban an app. Now, many activists, they are of the view that blocking VPN would damage move for online privacy, as these VPNs, they help secure digital rights which are guaranteed under the Constitution of India. The encrypted nature of information which are transferred over the VPN allows them not only to secure confidential information but also to safeguard the user's own identity, which does protect them from surveillance and censorship. And blocking VPN would violate the idea of right to privacy, which is guaranteed under the Article 21, which was also upheld by the Supreme Court in the Justice Puttaswamy case. Now, moving on to the third article of the day, which appeared on page 8 of today's Hindu newspaper. The Union Cabinet, it recently approved the introduction of National Research Foundation Bill. And this bill has once again generated the debate on science and technology funding in the spotlight. This development is important from GS Paper 3 point of view, as it deals with science and technology with their developments and their day-to-day applications. Further, in the mains of the year 2014, a question appeared on scientific research and why it has been declining in Indian universities. Hence, let us start off our today's discussion on National Research Foundation. Now, India, it has a huge pool of science and engineering graduates, a large number of laboratories and research institutions. Further, it also sees an active involvement in some of the frontline areas of scientific research. Despite having these, India lags behind several countries on variety of research indicators in a comparative term. Hence, there is an inherent need for National Research Foundation. Currently, the expenditure on research and development in the country has been 0.65%. Now, the government has a stated objective that it wants to allocate at least 2% of its GDP for research and development. However, not only this objective has not been met, the expenditure on research has gone down from about 0.8% at the start of 2011 to 0.65% currently. Also, according to 2021 UNESCO Science Report, at least 37 countries spent more than 1% of their GDP in R&D, and 15 of these countries have more than 2%. Hence, in comparative terms, India lags behind severely. Further, the research in universities in India is low, as India has nearly 40,000 institutions of higher education, and out of these 40,000 institutions, only 1,200 are fully fledged universities. And out of these 1,200 universities, only 1% are engaged in active research, which is very less than universities abroad. Further, in terms of research output, out of 40,000 doctorates in India, about 24,000 are from science and engineering discipline, which means 60% of the doctorates are in science and technology discipline. This puts India at 7th rank overall. However, in terms of number of researchers per million population, India's count at 262 is even less than developing countries such as Brazil, South Africa or Mexico. Now, in terms of publication, the data of Department of Science and Technology, it shows that India published about 1.5 lakh articles in the year 2020. However, this article accounts for about 5% of total articles worldwide. Whereas Chinese researchers, they contributed 23% of articles worldwide, whereas US, it contributed to about 15.5% globally. And hence, India also lags behind in the parameter of publications. Further, where we consider patents, in 2021, India saw a filing of more than 61,500 patents, making India the 6th largest worldwide. But this count is nowhere close to China's 16 lakh patents and US's 6 lakh patents. Hence, India also lags behind in the parameter of patents. Therefore, there is an inherent need for the National Research Foundation. What is a National Research Foundation? Let us find out in the next slide. Now, setting up the National Research Foundation was one of the key recommendations of National Education Policy of the year 2020. The National Research Foundation, it intends to act as a coordinating agency between researchers and various government bodies and industries, thus bringing the industry into the mainstream of research. In addition to providing the research grants to individuals, the National Research Foundation also plans to seed, grow, and facilitate research in Indian universities. It also aims to fund research infrastructure and researchers in the country. Now, the question remains how the National Research Foundation will be funded. Now, the National Research Foundation will operate on a budget of 50,000 crores for a period of 5 years. Of these 50,000 crores, 28% will be the government share, and the remaining 72%, that is the 36,000 crores, will come from private sector. Now the NRF draft, it proposes that the government share will eventually increase to 20,000 crores per year. And out of these 20,000 crores, 4,000 crores will be used from the existing Science and Engineering Research Board budget, which will be then subsumed into NRF. Therefore, the government has earmarked an additional budget of 10,000 crore rupees, which is over the period of next 5 years. Now the question comes, how can NRF facilitate the ease of doing science in India? The answer to this is in the next slide. Now, to facilitate the ease of doing science in India, it requires several steps. The first of this step is the time between applying for a research grant and receiving the money must be minimal. Thereby, there is an inherent need to reduce the time to receive money. Although the NRF draft, it mentions that peer-to-peer review process, which will be completed within 6 months. However, the releasing of funds may take some time, which will be pending, subjected to financial clearances. Secondly, there is a further need for digitization of paperwork, as all the paperwork must be digitally processed without sending the stack of papers in hard copies to the NRF. Further, all finance related queries, paperwork, approval and acceptance need to be between the NRF and the university concerned, which will intend to keep the scientist free to focus on their research. Further, scientific research needs independent guidelines for spending money, which will provide flexibility to scientists in addition to be accountable. Also, the release of money needs to be timely. Hence, in order to improve the private participation, it is necessary to reduce the time to receive money, further the digitization of paperwork, easing the financial requirements of scientists, and publishing an independent guidelines on spending money. Hence, this was all for today's discussion on National Research Foundation. Now let us move to the final article of the day, which appeared on page 7 of today's Hindu newspaper. This article reports how the CPI basket conceals the inflation picture in the country. The scope of today's discussion is important because GS Paper 3 deals with Indian economy and issues related to mobilization of resources. Further, inflation finds itself in the previous year question of the year 2019, where a question appeared on need for steady growth and low inflation rate. Also, in the prelims of the year 2020, a question appeared on weightage of consumer price index. Hence, let us discuss the CPI, that is Consumer Price Index, first before dealing with how this basket conceals the inflation picture. Now, inflation rate is a rate which eventually tells us the rate at which the prices of a commodity is rising in an economy. As such, inflation rate is expressed in terms of percentage. For suppose, if a prices of onions rose from rupees 10 per kilogram to 15 rupees per kilogram in a period of 1 year, it accounts for about 50% rise in inflation. The inflation rate is calculated on both year-to-year basis and on a month-to-month basis. There are two important inflation rates in the country. The first is the wholesale price index, which calculates inflation rate at a wholesale basis. whereas the second is the Consumer Price Index, which calculates the retail inflation rate. There are two different baskets of goods and services for both these inflation rates. Now the Consumer Price Index, it is published by the National Statistical Office, which comes under the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. The base year of Consumer Price Index is 2012, and the Consumer Price Index is published on the 12th of every month. Hence, it is published in today's newspaper, which is 13th of July. Also, the items covered under Consumer Price Index are 299. There are different categories in Consumer Price Index. The most important is the food and beverage category, which accounts for almost 46% of weightage. Also, there is a pan, tobacco and intoxicants category, which accounts for about 2.5%. The clothing and footwear category, it accounts for almost 6.5%, whereas housing accounts for 10%. Also, fuel and light is an important category, which does not include the prices of petrol and diesel. However, it includes electricity, LPG, kerosene, etc., and weights for about 7% in total. Further, there is a miscellaneous category, which includes education, healthcare, transportation and communication, and it accounts for almost 28.32%. Now the weightage of food articles is important, as there is a separate Consumer Food Price Index, which accounts for 39% of weightage. However, it is important to note that Consumer Food Price Index, it excludes non-alcoholic beverages and prepared meals and snacks from the item of food beverages above. As against Wholesale Price Index, services are included in Consumer Price Index, and indirect tax are also included here. Now, the importance of Consumer Price Index can be gauged by the fact as the government amended the RBI Act of 1934, and it set an inflation target of 4% with upper and lower limit of 2% respectively. Hence, the RBI is mandated under the RBI Act to maintain the inflation rate, that is CPI, between 2 and 6%. And in this regard, let us discuss the today's article. Now the CPI basket should not be viewed as an unchangeable artifact. On the contrary, the real consumption basket of a common man is fluid and continuously evolving, which mirrors the shift in societal needs, preferences, and economic conditions. Hence, as the time progresses, consumption patterns of individuals and households, they inevitably change. Hence, technological advancements introduce new products and services which needs to be accounted in CPI basket. However, this article reports that we continue to monitor basket of goods which includes obsolete items such as torches, radios, tape recorders, video cassettes and trunks, etc. Although these have a minimal weight in overall CPI calculation, however, tracking these items are no longer relevant in our consumption patterns. Further, this article also argues that there is an over-reliance on food products, as the food and beverage section accounts for 45.86% of total weight. As this does not reflect the gradual decline in an economy in case the proportion of income increases. Now, over-reliance on food inflation today distinguishes us from other economies, where the food weight is much smaller in their inflation indexes. Hence, an index should account for shifts in people's income and hence tend to allocate a larger proportion of their spending on non-food items such as housing, education, healthcare, personal care, entertainment and digital services, etc. And this should reflect a general improvement in the living standard and a broadening consumer demands. Further, there is a high weightage on cereals, as cereals account for 9.67% of total weightage. And it brings us two important issues. First, As nations undergo economic advancements and societal progress, a typical trajectory should involve diversifying food intakes and embracing a broader range of nutrient rich options, which should be beyond the cereals. Also, this paradigm shift in dietary habits have undoubtedly manifested over the past decade, and this is not been accounted in consumer price index. Further, due to Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana, it has substantially reduced the requirement of cereal expenditure for a large segment of population. And this modified consumption pattern should be accounted for in the CPI as well. Further, there has been excessive emphasis on tomatoes, onion and potatoes, and rise in prices of such commodities are reflected in the CPI data. Also, there is a non-updated consumption expenditure data, as it is essential to comprehend the evolution of consumption patterns across the country. And the challenges lies in effectively reflecting these changes in our inflation metrics, as currently we do not have access to updated consumption expenditure data. Hence, the weight of CPI needs to go a significant shift, which should account for data from consumption expenditure surveyed data. Hence, what should be the way forward? Therefore, in a rapidly evolving economy, our data collection and inflation estimates must adapt and evolve in tandem to ensure that they are accurately reflecting realities of our modern day consumption and living. Additionally, there is a need for efficient data processing, which should be a non negotiable priority. Further, there is a need to publish the consumer expenditure survey data, as absence of CES has spawned several issues, as currently we are unable to determine the population under poverty line, and our ability to track inflation effectively has been severely undermined. Hence, our ability to understand and manage our economic reality needs further improvement. This can be done by improving the data collection and estimation and publishing the consumption expenditure survey data publicly. This was all for today's discussion on Consumer Price Index.